Friends, the next article I'm going to deal with is macro variable projections in uncertain times. We have seen that the US Federal Reserve has raised the interest rates by 0.75 percentage. The Reserve Bank of India has followed suit by raising the repo rates. It is going on increasing the repo rates. The Monetary Policy Committee of the Reserve Bank of India is going on increasing the repo rates. It is in response to the United States Federal Reserve's increase in the interest rates. All these factors indicate that something is wrong at the global economy. The globalization of the economy has felt the heat of various concomitant factors, which is pushing the central banks of major economies and also India to raise its repo rates and interest rates. Indian policymakers are faced with twin challenges. What are those twin challenges? First challenge is global supply chain disruption. Global supply chain disruption is the impediment of the supplies among the countries, between the countries producing them and the countries consuming them. For example, China is a major producer of many articles needed by the consumer world. When the COVID 19 related disruptions have induced lockdowns in China, the Chinese articles were not exported to other parts of the world, resulting in global disruption. China is always following a zero COVID policy, and for the 6 months it has implemented lockdowns again. Global supply chain disruptions are also caused by the Russia Ukraine war. With the Russia and Ukraine war, major supplies of energies, that is, petroleum and wheat and metals, are affected. Hence, the global economies all over the world are facing a stagflation situation. Stagflation situation in the sense that the prices of all the commodities are rising. And the second challenge which Indian policymakers are facing is that the accurate data related to the macro variable projections are not available. Macro variable projections are like the GDP data. So when the reliable data related to the macro variable projections like GDP are not available, a distorted picture of the GDP is and the growth projection is what is the result. Hence, there are three factors which is responsible for the distortions in macro variable projections because of the inaccurate or the inadequate data which is made available. The first is that from the unorganized sectors, except for agriculture, reliable data is not available. Second, for the organized sector itself, the reliable data is inaccurate. That is, the correct data is not available. And the third is that when the data is becoming available, it is not being correctly put in the perspective. So these three factors are resulting in the distortions in the macroeconomic variables like GDP data. So these twin challenges, one from the global supply chain disruptions and the data related to the macroeconomic variables not correctly available, these twin challenges are just nagging the Indian policymakers. It all started with early 2020 when COVID 19 impacted the pandemic, impacted the whole world. And the lockdowns were imposed all over the nations, all over the globe, and all over the world. And thereby, the production stopped in countries like China, and the global supply chain disruptions because the Chinese products were not available, were not moving out of the country, resulting in global supply chain disruptions, and it resulted in the prices rising and the stagflation kind of situation. Stagflation is the rise in the prices of the commodities and fall in the consumer's income to consume the products. So this stagflation kind of situation was followed by when the Ukraine war had set in since February 2022. Further supply chain disruptions occurred, and the war is still raging on, and the European and US world is just supporting Ukraine to continue the war with Russia. The economic sanctions are also imposed. Economic sanctions means the stopping of buying materials from Russia. So the energy was not bought from Russia by USA and European countries. So these kinds of sanctions, economic sanctions and supply of war materials to the Ukraine resulted in further supply chain disruptions. China is having a zero COVID policy. Therefore, even if certain samples are detected for COVID, China just imposed the zero COVID policy, that is lockdowns. So again, the Chinese manufacturing stopped, and there was another supply chain disruption. This will lead to, even if the war with Ukraine ends, this will lead to a Cold War situation with some countries on the one block, most of the countries on one block, and China and Russia on the other block. China will depend upon Russia, will support Russia because China is an isolated nation. So this will further compound the problem. The problem is going on getting compounded rather than being solved. And the third main reason why the macroeconomic variables are not accurate, as I said, due to the data inaccuracy or the data inadequate availability. So what is now is happening is that the world economy is moving in a way in which a pilot moves through the fog filled climate, clouds, and the environment where the aeroplane which he is driving will have a greater chance of nose diving into the bottom.